Okay, yeah, so let me start and say thank you so much for having me. I generally, for those people that have seen my talks before, I generally start having a bit of a rant about the fact that nobody seems to care about minke whales and that everybody studies bottlenose dolphins and porpoises. And I know that's just not the case when it comes to HWDT. They're responsible for a lot of the minke whale work that we have off the West Coast, as well as a couple of the other organizations that I've seen people from that are here tonight as well. So my talk tonight is entitled, well, Where There's a Whale, There's a Way. And really it's focusing on bringing all these bits of data together to try and help us to understand a better picture of the minke whales and what's happening particularly off the West Coast of Scotland. So I'm going to start the talk tonight just giving a bit of background about myself. Then I'm going to dive into what we know about minke whales, what we don't know about minke whales, and what it is we're doing to try and fill those gaps where we don't know things about minke whales. So before I go any further, I'd just like to thank my brilliant supervisory team. All 5 of them on screen there play a really important role in my PhD, giving advice and things, but I'd particularly like to thank Denise and Ben because they're the ones that have to drag me back from whichever rabbit hole I've run down this week. And they generally are the ones that have to put up with me. And I'd also like to thank all of the people on screen now, because these are all of the people that have contributed to my project in one way or another, either through funding or through data of some kind. So thank you so much. This PhD and this project wouldn't be possible without any of you guys. And I know there's a couple of different organizations represented here tonight. So thank you particularly to you guys. So onto a little bit of background about me. Well, I started my conservation journey, I guess, as an undergraduate at University of Exeter. And whilst I was doing my conservation degree, I decided that we really weren't taught enough about mapping, and I could see a real value in using maps to try and display where animals were and try and display where threats were. And so I did a master's also at the University of Exeter looking at surveying and environmental management, and then moved back to the Midlands in England to pursue a micro career in surveying, where I really kind of honed a lot of these skills and learned a lot about coordinate reference systems and things which generally aren't taught too widely in conservation biology. But it wasn't really for me as a career engineering in itself. And so I wanted to bring it back to conservation biology. And when I was presented with the opportunity to do an internship with dolphins in Montenegro, an internship where I'd be using my theodolite skills, then it was quite a difficult decision for me to take, whether to leave a really well-paying job to go out on a bit of a limb to go back to what I loved. But it wasn't a particularly difficult decision in the end. I had a choice of whether to carry on surveying ditches or to go and survey dolphins in the sun. And similarly, I had a choice whether to carry on making plans and drawings for architects and miserable clients or go out and study some of the most phenomenally interesting animals. And so, believe it or not, I decided to take the job in Montenegro, and I did a 3-month internship in Montenegro, where I met some wonderful people and I learned some incredible skills, and also met the love of my life, but that's a different story. And I carried on with that internship, which developed into a 6-month staff position. And I continued really enjoying that as just a short-term staff position, and decided that actually this is what I wanted to do. So I carried on working out in Montenegro, Albania, Turkey, and to a smaller extent, other parts of the Mediterranean for 3 amazing years, working with a range of different dolphin species and even a couple of whales. And just because I've shown all those lovely pictures, I want to go into a little bit about Instagram versus reality, or probably TikTok versus reality. This is probably an outdated slide these days. But I'm sure the HWDT people will back me up here. For every picture that you see, which is like this, with the beautiful scenery, studying animals in kind of peace, then there's 1,000 untaken pictures where you've been awake for sort of 24, 36 hours because everyone else on board is seasick, and you've been listening to the acoustics. When people study acoustics, they think they're going to be hearing dolphins and whales constantly. In reality, what you're doing is you're actually listening to white noise most of the time. And mostly these systems are kept indoors, so you can't even see the horizon. So you're often feeling really sick. So you've been awake for 36 hours, and then you go back to your bedroom or your cabin to find out that your roommates left the cabin hatch open, your cabin's flooded, and you no longer have somewhere to sleep. And so you're wandering around not knowing what to do, and all of a sudden the galley floor becomes very comfortable, and you just end up taking your hour or two sleep just wherever you can. And often it's not really even as exciting as this. People always think that I'm spending loads of time with dolphins or whales, but actually a lot of my time spent behind the computer, and probably 99% of it spent behind the computer, trying to analyze this data that's collected. I also wanted to go into a little bit of a serious note here. I had an amazing time in Montenegro, Albania, and Turkey, but I was working crazy hours, and this led to me having some mental health problems. And for anyone that's kind of starting out in conservation, I think there's a lot of pressure for people to work ridiculous hours. When I was in Montenegro, I was working kind of 12 to 16 hours a day, 6 to 7 days a week. And that's just not sustainable. So please, if you are kind of in a similar position to me 5 years beforehand, make sure you look after yourself. You can't be working those kind of hours, and you just end up burning out. And actually this had a bit of a knock-on impact to my PhD, because even at the start of my PhD, I was still a bit burnt out. But all this work led to me arriving at my real interest, and that was looking at collecting baseline information for where animals were, and then trying to overlap the threats that they were facing to find out where these animals and where their threats were overlapping. And this photo is barely believable, but this was taken on a survey I was doing in Istanbul. So this is a crazy bit of water. I don't know if anyone's been before, but it's only about 700 meters wide at its narrowest point, and it connects the Black Sea to the Mediterranean, and it's one of the busiest places I've ever been. And seemingly you've got populations of dolphin, both bottlenose dolphin, common dolphin, and harbour porpoise, which are living happily, seemingly happily. I'm sure that it's not particularly happy existence amongst all this chaos. And so through a mixture of kind of luck and hard work, I was able to publish a number of different publications. So on the left, you can see there's a couple of publications looking at trying to define baseline data. So this data is kind of the first data for Montenegro, Albania, and Turkey, particularly certain regions of Turkey, where we're plotting bottlenose dolphins for the first time, and trying to work out exactly what areas it is on those regions that they're using. Then the second image on screen you can see is a behavioral study. And what we were doing in those behavioral studies is we were looking at how dolphins were affected by the presence of different vessels. So we looked at tourist vessels and how that was affecting dolphin behavior. Then we looked at different types of fishing vessels, so comparing between large scale kind of commercial fishing vessels and just small scale artisanal vessels where you've just got people out with maybe 2 or 3 people with rods or small nets. And finally, we kind of looked at overlapping these. So this is a paper which came out quite recently, and it basically just shows the overlap between different dolphin and whale species off the coast of Turkey, and how they overlapped with marine traffic, and how basically the protected areas that were in place already weren't really being effective. And a bit of a shameless plug here, if you're not sick of my voice already, I'm going to be doing a talk on the bottlenose dolphin work next week for the Society of Marine Mammalogy. So feel free to come along to that if you are interested in learning more about how dolphin behavior is affected by vessels. So all these publications ultimately led me getting ultimately led me to get into my current PhD, which, as Caroline said, is all about minke whales, and particularly looking at their distributions, their acoustics, and foraging off the west coast of Scotland. So finally, let's talk minke whales. Enough about me. So what do we know about minke whales in Scotland? Well, some of the most important questions that we might want to know in terms of their conservation are questions like, how do minke whales use Scottish waters? What do they sound like in Scotland? And what are they eating in Scotland? So what do we know about minke whales in Scotland? Well, the very short answer is not much. Despite the great work that's been done by organisations like HWDT on the West Coast, we really still don't know that much about minke whales. So what do we know? Well, in terms of how minke whales use Scottish waters, we know that they're here in group sizes, normally of 1 to 3. I mean, you can get them up to kind of 15 individuals or even 20 individuals in rare cases, but generally we see them on their own or in small groups. They're generally here in the summer, and they're generally here from kind of April to October time. But we do know that we've got a couple of individuals that are here in the winter and could even be year-round residents. And then you can see that generally in the area, so from on the map on the left, you can see that generally in the area kind of between the mainland and the Outer Hebrides, we kind of got a pretty continuous presence of minke whales, slightly higher in some areas than others, but we've got pretty continuous presence. And I just want to say that I've unapologetically stolen all of those images from the Hebridean Whale and Dolphin Trust Marine Mammal Atlas. So if you've not had a look at that already, then it's a really good resource. It's not just minke whales. They've got a lot of the different cetacean species. So we kind of know this basic information from the work that's been done so far. But what's not really been looked at yet is how minke whales are moving through Scottish waters. So there's kind of an assumption been made that they come from the south and they move through past the sort of Mull in the early season, and then they move up to the Small Isles and into the Minch. But we really haven't looked at that into enough detail, and we've not looked at things like how this changes between different years and stuff like that. And we also aren't really sure what it is that kind of drives the presence of minke whales. So is it something like the sea surface temperature, or is it the depth? Now, there's been small studies done. So Kelly MacLeod and Peer Underworld and their research teams have looked at that on a relatively small scale, but nobody's kind of really looked at it on a larger scale and on a temporal scale yet. So on to the next question: what do minke whales sound like in Scotland? Well, the answer is we kind of know this one a little bit better. We know that minke whales have got this very distinctive pulse train, and I'll play that for you a little bit later in the presentation, provided that the audio actually works. But they've got this very distinctive pulse train, and you can see that on the graph on the right hand side, the lighter areas represent where we have more of these minke whale pulse trains detected, and you can see that between June and August time, when we'd be expecting to get the most minke whales, we do get a lot of these detections. But then if you look at the left-hand side of the graph, you can see that we also get this kind of weird peak of detections in October and November, which based on the visual data, we're not really expecting. So this data was collected on a number of fixed hydrophones, and these hydrophones are basically recording data non-stop. So the green ones were recording data for 1 year, and the blue hydrophones that you can see where they were all recording for 2 years. So the previous image that I showed was just looking at N1, EL1 and S1. So all those detections in the previous image were for N1, EL1, E1 and S1. And when we did a bit of a preliminary look at kind of the inland acoustic stations, which were recording for similar time periods just 1 year out, then we didn't actually find a lot of these pulse trains, which is really unusual, because if you look at our distribution map of minke whales from the visual data on the left-hand side, and you look at our acoustics map on the right-hand side, then really at the high skier site and further north, we should be hearing minke whale pulses if they're there. And this has come up, kind of led people with more knowledge than me to come up with a theory that what we've got male minke whales producing these pulse sounds. Now, this isn't too unusual because we've got a lot of other species, both terrestrially and in the marine environment, where males have kind of a repetitive call to try and attract females in the breeding season. But the hypothesis which has been suggested is that female minke whales don't produce any noise. Now, I just want to remind you that this is an animal which is 7 meters to 10 meters long and weighs multiple tons. And if there's any younger children that are on the call at the moment, I'd just like to ask them to just cover their ears. What a load of crap. What are the chances that we've got an animal which is multiple tons just cruising through the ocean, thousands of kilometers, and they're just going along in absolute silence? So that's frankly a load of nonsense. We just don't know what they sound like at the moment. The kind of leading hypothesis, yes, we probably do just have male minke whales which are producing the pulse strains, but female minke whales are definitely producing noise as well. So finally, what are they eating in Scotland? Well, we know for sure that they're definitely eating sand eels, which are on the left. And it's been hypothesized by, again, Kelly MacLeod, that they're eating herring, and by Peter Underwold that they're eating sprat as kind of their other dietary information. So we definitely know that some of these are important, but then when we dive into kind of other studies in the North Atlantic, then we find that actually minke whales are probably eating way more than that. So in answer to the 3 questions that I asked earlier, we don't really know how minke whales are using Scottish waters in fine scale detail. We don't really know what they sound like in Scotland, particularly when we consider the female minke whales, and we're not really sure what it is they're eating. And really that's where my PhD comes in. So if I was to explain this in kind of a more scientific conference, then I would say that my PhD is looking at mathematically modeling species distribution of minke whales and the use of artificial intelligence to extract the vocalizations of minke whales. Now that sounds incredibly boring, and even to me, and I study it day in, day out. And I've got no doubt that that's either sending a lot of our listeners and viewers into a bit of a snooze, kind of switching off, or people to kind of have a bit of a meltdown because they don't like listening to these very scientific terms. But I'm going to let everybody here today into a little bit of a secret, and that is that really quite often scientists just throw in these terms to try and make themselves feel better about whatever work it is they're doing. And really a lot of this stuff's far more simple than people would let you believe. Hopefully I've not kind of talked myself out of a postdoc or career position in later life there, but we'll see. So if we take our original piece of nonsense and we scribble out a lot of the overly technical words and then kind of rearrange it all to get something that makes a bit more sense, then really the questions that my PhDs are asking are twofold. The first is, where are the minke whales? When are they here? And why are they here in Scotland particularly? And why are they in different parts of Scotland? And then secondly, where is it that they're vocalizing, and when are they vocalizing, and why? So let's approach the first question first. How are we going to take a look at this? Well, as Caroline said, I've got this amazing data set from the Hebridean Whale and Dolphin Trust. Now, these surveys have been running since 2002 and even earlier as kind of sea life surveys. So I've got 17 years of data at the moment, and that's more than 100,000 kilometers of data. And to put that into perspective, because I think it's quite difficult to try and get our head around these numbers when they get so large, that's the equivalent of the Silurian research vessel going around the world 2.5 times. So that's a crazy amount of survey effort. And to top that off, we've got almost 1,000 minke whale sightings. But unfortunately, as superheroic as HWDT are, they can't be ever all at once. And so while they're up in the Minch, just sailing around happily, our whales might actually be down here. And so this is where the modeling element comes in. And this is the scary bit in inverted commas, the species distribution modeling. But again, it's actually really quite a simple, thing to do. And there's only 3 basic steps. The first is to look at the conditions where the minke whales are. The second is to look at the conditions where the minke whales aren't. And finally, all we have to do is match these 2 sets of conditions across our areas of interest. So what do I mean by that? Well, if we take a look at our data and say we find a whale off here near Stanton Bank, then what we do is that we take various bits of information like the depth the whale was seen at, the slope where the whale was seen, and the kind of sea surface temperature and things like that. And then we look at areas where we've not seen whales and we do exactly the same things. So where we've not seen whales, we look at exactly the same variables. So we look at depth, slope, and temperature and things like that. And if we do this for long enough, then we can begin to build up a really nice graph of what depths it might be that the whales like. And again, what depths it might be that the whales don't like. So on the left-hand side, we've got the area that the whales like. And then on the right-hand side, we've got the areas, the depths that a whale might not like. So just to clarify, this isn't actual data on minke whales. This is just an animation to try and show a point. But if we group this data together, we can end up getting quite a nice graph. Again, this is just looking at a different way, but looking at what depths a whale might like and what depths a whale might not like. And because it's nature, you're always going to get weird whales. So we get weird whales that are going to like it a bit deeper, and we're going to get weird whales that like it a bit shallower. That's just the way it is. But the majority of whales will have a kind of a preference. And if we do this for enough different conditions, so if we look at depth, we look at slope, we look at distance from shore, then that's all there is to our species distribution model. So we've looked at the conditions where whales are now. We've looked at conditions where they're not. The next step is to use this information to match those conditions to the conditions that we have across our area of interest. So for us, this is, of course, the west coast of Scotland. So we look at a number of different things. We look at the depth, the distance from coast, and the slope. And we look at how they are in our survey area. Excuse me. And it does get a little bit more complicated because some of our conditions are changing. So, for example, if we look at our sea surface temperature, then that's obviously getting warmer and colder throughout the year. So we do have to take that into account as well. But effectively, once we've got that, we can match what our whale likes and what our whale doesn't like, and use this to try and make predictions for the West Coast. So hopefully you can see what's on screen at the moment. And these are just, I can't stress enough, these are very, very preliminary results, and the model is going to change probably 10 times from now. But these are very preliminary results, and already with this quite basic structure that we've employed, you can see that we're getting a movement of minke whales from early April, May, moving further north into June and July, staying quite north in August, and then generally dispersing as we get into the autumn months. And as I said, it's a really basic model. So yeah, please don't read too much into it, but that's where we're at the moment. And it matches with the information that we do know, which gives me a lot of confidence in this model. Interestingly, down in the southwest corner, you'll notice that we've got this kind of red area where we appear to have a lot of minke whales. And actually, this is one of the hydrophone sites. So this is one of the recording sites where we've got a lot of minke whale vocalizations as well. So that also seems to add up. So I told a little bit of a fib. So in my PhD, I'm actually going to be adding a 4th step, and that is to overlap these distribution models to look at certain potential threats. And I'm afraid the next image is a little bit graphic, but in Scotland, we do have a problem with entanglement of whales. And actually, there's a really great paper that's come out recently from the Scottish Entanglement Alliance, which includes some authors from Hebridean Whale and Dolphin Trust. And if you've not heard of the Scottish Entanglement Alliance before, basically they're a group of different NGOs, I think government body, and then most importantly, the Creel Fishing Association as well, who are all working together to try and solve this problem of entanglement, because we do lose quite a lot of minke whales and a couple of humpback whales a year to entanglement. So this is an ongoing project, and hopefully I'll be able to help out with that. So we've covered where the minke whales are. Let's cover what it is they're doing when they're vocalizing, and where they might be vocalizing. So how are we going to approach that? Well, I showed you earlier, but we've got this amazing array of data information that stretches. It actually goes further south than what I've got in the image. It goes right down to Northern Ireland. So we've got these 10 green stations, and then we've got the 10 blue stations as well. So I think there's only 6 or 7 on screen at the moment. But basically, the way that we have to do this at the moment is to go through the data manually and try and annotate, to try and label when it is that we see minke whales, to try and draw patterns. And I've just kind of put a back of the envelope calculation. Dependent on the day, I can roughly work through 10 days worth of recordings if I'm doing pretty good. But the 10 blue stations have been in the water for 2 years each, and the 10 green stations are in for a year. So that's equivalent to nearly 11,000 days of recording. Now, as I said, I can normally get through 6 to 10 days of recordings in one working day. However, as I said, acoustics isn't listening to dolphins and whales. Most of the time, acoustics is listening to white noise. And so if I listen to acoustics on the consecutive days, not only does my productivity goes down, but I also begin to have a couple of anger issues and look a little bit like this. And generally, the PhD students and staff from SAMS avoid me. So just assuming that I could get myself to do 6 of these days worth of recordings for each day, and I allowed myself a break at weekends. If I was to go through all of this data manually, it would take 8.5 years. So I really need to find a different way to start approaching this. And the answer lies in using artificial intelligence. Now, artificial intelligence isn't the robots and stuff that we've seen from sci-fi films, but really it's just a load of computer programs, and it's not terribly interesting. But I'm going to try and explain exactly how we use them with a bit of an analogy. Now, I grew up in a small town located virtually in the centre of England, which is known as Burton-on-Trent. Now, I'm sure many of you will be racking your brains trying to remember why it is that you know the name Burton-on-Trent. And it is, of course, because of Burton's football team, Burton Albion. Now, I'm sure many of you are very avid Burton Albion supporters, but just for those of you that aren't into football, I'll give you a couple more details about Burton. So Burton are currently 20th in League One, which doesn't sound too bad until you realise that actually League One isn't the top league of English football, and it's actually the 3rd tier. So they're currently sat in 20th position, just above the relegation zone in the 3rd tier of English football. On average, they've lost every game this season 3-2. So if we're to look at the last 5 seasons, then Burton have scored 250 goals, which doesn't sound too bad until you realise that 5 seasons worth of football is equivalent to 19,095 minutes of football. So you've basically watched 20,000 minutes of football to see Burton score 250 times. If we look at that another way, they're only scoring 1 goal every 76 minutes. And surely nobody in their right mind is watching that much tier 3 football to try and see their team score so few goals. Well, there might be a couple of people that are willing to do that, but surely same people would want to try and use artificial intelligence to reduce that amount of wasted time. So how would we go about doing this and using artificial intelligence? Well, we'd clip down our video analysis to times when Burton score a goal, and we'd label this as goals. And then we'd also label a load of different video footage from around the pitch where there is no goals being scored, or where it's another team that was scoring a goal, because we're not interested in that. And this is the majority of the time, as you saw from the previous statistics. So the type of artificial intelligence that we're using is called a convoluted neural network, which again sounds quite terrifying. But a convoluted neural network is just a computer network which is based on how the brain works. If you've ever wondered how it is that we can recognize imagery, recognize what objects are even from far away, it's because we've got this very sophisticated network. And the way our brain works, and this is really kind of simplifying things in case there are any people that study the brain in much greater detail than me here, but effectively the way our brain works is that we scan images, and for each image, each kind of pixel or each grid cell within this image, we provide a value of how likely we think that something is. So if we're looking at the top left for pixel 1, then that's going to give us a value of 0 for whether this is a goal. If we're to look at pixel 2 moving across, then still 0. As we get to pixel 3, then we think, okay, well, this has got a couple of the attributes that might make it look like a goal. And as we move to 4, then really we're getting much more. We've got net, we've got post. This is really likely to be a goal. So our initial kind of input to this is looking like a goal. And then we go all the way through the image, scanning through. And eventually when we get to 99, this pixel down here is back to grass again. So we can say that this isn't the goal. And basically all that happens with our brain is that this gets fed into information, and then our brain has, this is what we consider the input in blue, and then our brain has an output where we decide either this is a goal or it's not a goal. And you'll note that I say probably because we can only work on probability with the brain. So whenever we analyze an image, and especially if we're kind of looking at something further away or in the dark, then those odds are going to change. And in reality, it is a little bit more complex than this, because we have what's called a hidden layer. Between our input layer and our output layer, we have a hidden layer in our neurons, which does a load of calculations that happen behind the scene. And the computer programming works in exactly the same way. So how exactly does the artificial intelligence, how does this convoluted neural network make its decision about whether it's a goal or not a goal? Well, the answer is, and this is kind of shocking and kind of scary, especially if you're into the idea that robots are going to kind of take over the planet, we don't know how this works. We have absolutely no idea how this imaging works. But we can imagine that it's making decisions like, is there a goal in the image? Is there a ball in the image? Is there a player wearing Burton's yellow kit in the image? And are the fans that are wearing yellow celebrating? So you can imagine it's kind of questions and ideas like this that the AI is actually going through itself. And over time, we want to kind of build up something which is a little bit like this. And this will tell us, if we've got our predicted goals at the top and our actual goals in real life, how often we're getting it right. And I've just focused on these two boxes here. So the one in the top left is the times that we've predicted with our software that we're going to score a goal, and we've actually got that goal in real life. And then the bottom right is the time where there's no goal predicted and there's no goal in life. And so basically we want to use our model and keep tweaking our model to maximize these two values. And then we also want to try and decrease the values in the top right and the top left. Because if we've not predicted a goal and actually there was a goal in real life, then we've missed a goal. So obviously we want to decrease that. And then if we've in this bottom left and we've predicted a goal and there was no goal in real life, then that means that we've wasted our life watching tier 3 football for no reason. But this talk is obviously not about football and it's about minke whales. So we're going to jump back into them and we're going to show how we're going to use the same principle for minke whales. So in case people haven't seen it before, this is what a minke whale call looks like. This is quite a clean minke whale call. And you can see we've got this kind of pulse train. And I'm going to try and play the audio now. Maybe somebody can give me a thumbs up if you can hear the audio. So this is what a minke whale sounds like. And it's not like the stereotypical call of a humpback whale, which is the one people think of when they hear whale song. This is a minke whale pulse train, and it's that predominant, probably male generated call that I was talking about earlier. And actually the artificial intelligence, when we're trying to detect these calls, works in exactly the same way as the previous goal scenario that I gave you. So we're not actually looking at the acoustic at all. We're looking at this image, which is produced in what's called a spectrogram in our research software. And basically, in exactly the same way, the grid moves across our image and says, not a minke whale, probably a minke whale, almost definitely a minke whale, back to probably a minke whale, and not a minke whale. And effectively, it goes through all of our data and it just draws boxes around what it is that the AI thinks is a minke whale. And this allows us to get an idea of what days we've got minke whale presence at which of those acoustic stations. And hopefully that's going to allow us to get an idea of how it is that minke whales are moving throughout Scottish waters and what time they're really arriving in Scottish waters at kind of these most outer stations. Once we've got that, then we can sort of compare that to the distribution, which will increase our confidence in our distribution models and increase our confidence in why we think it is that minke whales are using Scottish waters. And also, as I said, these stations in blue, they go all the way down to Northern Ireland. So it means that we'll actually be able to track that presence of minke whales from before Scottish waters and after Scottish waters. So we'll be able to see, when it is they're arriving and what direction it is they're arriving, whether they're arriving from the west or whether they're arriving from the south. Because one of the most ridiculous things, and this is the thing that I normally start my presentations ranting about, is that we actually have no idea where these whales are once they leave Scottish waters. Now, if we look at, say, Africa, then we know the exact migration pattern almost to the day of kind of wildebeest and the lions and various predators that follow the mass migrations. And we even know the migration patterns of small brown birds which fly to and from Africa to the UK and to other parts of Europe. But when it comes again to a 7 to 10 meter whale, which is multiple tons, once they leave Scottish waters, we've got absolutely no idea where they go. There's a couple of theories about where they go, but really we don't know for sure. And I want to say that particularly with this artificial intelligence, I'm not working on this on my own. I'm part of a much bigger team. We call ourselves the AI team, which is incredibly corny. But yeah, I'm part of a much bigger project working with other members of staff at SAMS, as well as with NOAA and the University of Aberdeen. So there's a couple of people from the Lighthouse. So we're all working on this together, as well as Benoit Burgess that's recently joined our team as well. So where are we in terms of the reality of using this AI to actually look at this data? Well, I've given the results of our previous iteration of the model, which came out in November 2022. And we got pretty good results, to be honest. So about 90% of the time when we were predicting a minke whale, it was actually a minke whale, and 95% of the time when we were predicting that there was no minke whale, there was no minke whale in the recording. So actually, these are really good results, and they're far better than models that have previously been used. There was one model previously used in the northeast of Scotland, so this is already better. But as a team, we thought that we could probably do even better than this. So we went back to the drawing board, and we're currently training a new model, which includes even more minke vocalizations. It includes a lot more minke vocalizations from Scotland, particularly because the previous model was mainly trained on minke whales from the east coast of the United States and Canada. So we've got a lot more Scottish minke whales in there. So therefore, we're expecting it to work better with Scottish models. But we've also got a lot more background noise from Scotland. So there's a number of different things like pile driving off the east coast of Scotland, and some of the mooring noise and boat noise off the west coast of Scotland, which was confusing the detector a little bit. Because as you probably realised when you heard the vocalisation of the minke whale, it's a really low frequency call. So it's actually much lower generally than say like humpback whales, and far lower than dolphins and things. So actually a lot of this human noise from kind of seismic and piling and boat noise overlaps with minke whales a lot. So we've encouraged our collaborators from around Scotland and further afield to include more of this data, and it's actually coming next week. And as a community of acoustic nerds, we are incredibly excited that it's finally going to be ready. So watch this space. It is going to be a reality in the next couple of months, and we are going to be able to run these acoustics data sets through with a day probably only taking maybe half an hour to run, maybe even 15 minutes to run, rather than a day taking, rather than doing 10 days in one working day, we can probably look at 100 or even 200 days of acoustics. So that's, fantastically exciting. And I've not really had time to go into this presentation, but we've also got a number of acoustic recorders now that are going to be observed visually to try and get to the bottom of the noises that female minke whales are making as well, because that's an area which has really been overlooked by a lot of biologists, and we are getting a little bit close there. So watch the space for that as well. Now, the more observant of you will realize that we've talked about these two, but I actually neglected my third question, which is what are minke whales eating in Scotland? And the reason I've done that is purely because I don't have enough time to go into it tonight. But actually, I'm collaborating with SMAS, and I'll have the very favourable job of digging into the stomachs of stranded minke whales to see exactly what it is they've been eating. So bringing out all the fish bones and trying to match them to prey species. So that is something that I'm going to be looking into, but that's probably going to be in a year or possibly even a year and a half's time. So thank you so much for listening to